You were never supposed to hear this. And 4 years ago, the Winslow family began a tradition so monstrous, so meticulously concealed, that even the local clergy swore blood oaths to stay silent. Beneath their pristine New England home, under porcelain smiles, lace curtains, and well-manicured lies, was a ritual chamber disguised as a wine cellar. And inside the walls were records of disappearances, names never entered into birth registries, children never logged in any census, and bones that didn't belong to animals. The town called them philanthropists. The newspapers called them patriarchs. But what history forgot to mention is that the Winslows were something much older, much darker, carriers of a tradition that did not begin with them and did not end when the last light went out in that house. This is not just a story of a family. This is a story about how institutions protect rot, how wealth silences screams, and how the walls of certain homes remember everything. It started with a whisper. A man named Jameson T. Winslow, who arrived from Europe in 1880 with a locked trunk, an embalmed child bride, and a theory about purity that would shape 4 generations of terror. He bought the land on Hollow Birch Lane not because it was beautiful, but because of what was buried beneath it. A burial site, an energy nexus, a place where rituals stuck, as he wrote in one of the 217 journals discovered by a demolition crew in 2003. Each journal marked a different year, a different child. And every entry began with the same phrase: "The Lamb has been chosen." This isn't just a horror story, it's a blueprint, a mirror held up to the elite, how they hide atrocities in estates, how they encode secrecy in genealogy, and how those who try to expose it either vanish or go mad. You're not watching this by accident. Something in you wants the truth, something in you knows. There's more to the world than what you were taught, and this story, this forbidden chronicle, is the doorway. But beware, once you know what the Winslows did, you can't unknow it. When the Winslow estate was finally seized in 2003, after decades of quiet tax manipulations and legal shielding, contractors were sent in to assess structural damage before demolition. What they found was not rot, but records. Behind a false wall in the East Wing's nursery, sealed with mortar older than the house itself, were shelves. Rows of antique shelves, hand-carved with runes no historian could decode, and on those shelves, 23 ledgers. Human hair tied each one shut, not rope, not twine. Hair, braided, childlike. The pages inside, journal entries, meticulously kept. Every detail recorded with surgeon-like precision. The paper itself was handmade, soaked in ash and lamb's blood. At least that's what the forensic reports claimed. Each book bore only the year on its spine, and the name of a different child. None of these names ever appeared in the town's birth records. Not a single one had a school enrollment, a baptism certificate, or even a photograph. Except for one. Tucked inside the 1911 ledger was a photo, sepia-toned, faded. A boy no older than 10. Standing beside Jameson T. Winslow with eyes like he'd already seen what was waiting in the basement. His name, Elijah. His diary was different from the others, less formal, less controlled, as if he was trying to get something out before it was too late. I can hear them whispering at night. They think I don't understand Latin, but I do. I know what vivanscaro means now. I saw what they did to the last boy when he screamed. The image of that child was burned into the memory of every demolition worker who saw it. 2 would quit within a week. 1 was institutionalized by Christmas. What shook them wasn't the photo. It wasn't even the journal. It was what they found behind it. A bricked-up alcove containing a perfectly preserved human tongue, wrapped in linen, still pink. The authorities ruled it historical debris. No further questions were asked. Because when you wear a name like Winslow, your crimes are never crimes, they're heritage. Your vault isn't a prison. It's a time capsule. And your house isn't haunted. It's protected. But now we're pulling back the veil. The basement door was chained shut, not locked. Chained. As if someone, long ago, knew that whatever was behind it wasn't meant to get out. It took the structural team over 4 hours to cut through the iron. Not steel, iron. Hand-forged Victorian era, cold and rusted. Every link fused with something like wax. When it finally gave, the temperature in the hallway dropped 10 degrees. Everyone felt it. No one spoke. Because silence has weight in a place like that. And every man present could feel it pressing down. They opened the door and found a staircase descending into blackness. No light switch, no railing, just stone steps slick with condensation and the faint sound of dripping. At the bottom, the ritual room. It wasn't labeled that, of course, but what else could it be? The walls were carved with reliefs, pagan symbols warped by Christian iconography. The Madonna's face twisted into a serpent, the Lamb of God strangled by vines, a sun with no light, symbols you won't find in any theology book but every ancient cult whispers about. In the center, a slab, altar or table, it didn't matter. It was stained. Next to it, restraints, leather, child-sized. And surrounding all of it were jars. Dozens of them, Mason style. Each sealed with wax and each containing the same thing. Teeth. Baby teeth, adult teeth, filed, broken, stained, some still bloody. But it was what was beneath the slab that sent 2 men vomiting up the stairs. A tunnel, dug by hand, reinforced with timber beams, leading into darkness that no one wanted to measure. They dropped a light in. It vanished after 15 feet. No echo, no return, just gone. And on the wall next to the tunnel was scrawled one word in dried black ink. Remain. As if whatever had been brought down there wasn't supposed to leave. No official record of this room exists. No photos made it into the press. The entire crew was paid out under NDA, and the demolition halted indefinitely. The town report claimed asbestos, but the truth was far more toxic. Because families like the Winslows, they don't get caught, they get rebranded. And the more you dig, the more you realize. The story wasn't hidden. It was buried on purpose. They say the house was built in 1887. That's the official record. What's not recorded is what stood on the land before it. See, the Winslow estate wasn't just built, it was planted, cultivated, like a seed in the soil of something ancient. The foundations go deeper than they should, much deeper, through layers of sediment that predate modern construction by centuries. Romanesque brickwork, subterranean arches, and what one geologist called non-native stone, as in, not from this continent. But here's the part no one talks about. Before the Winslows arrived, that land was part of a quarantine zone. 1834 cholera outbreak. Dozens dead, most of them children. No church would bury them. The locals believed the ground was cursed. Choleric soil, they called it. Unfit for life or resurrection, which is exactly why the Winslows chose it. Because to them, cursed land wasn't a deterrent. It was a feature. They were ritualists, not the theatrical kind with robes and candles. No, the Winslows were clinical, aristocratic, cold. They didn't worship darkness. They harnessed it. Through genealogy, through repetition, through pain. And it all centered around the children. 10 adopted over a 40-year period. None with birth certificates. No records from hospitals. No legal adoptions filed. These children were ghosts. Paperless, nameless, invisible to the state. But not to the house. The Winslows didn't raise them. They prepared them. And in every generation, one was chosen. Chosen to remain, not disappear, not die. Remain, trapped beneath, embedded in ritual, reborn through repetition. The tunnels weren't escape routes, they were arteries, carrying something ancient through the house like blood through a body. And when the house was finally abandoned in 1991, the town assumed the line had ended. But it hadn't. Because when the demolition crew cracked, opened the wall behind the nursery, they found it. A sealed room, no door, just brick. And inside, a child's bed, still warm, still rocking, as if whoever had been inside had just left. They called it the nursery, but it was nothing like a place for life. No sunlight, no warmth, no windows, just a single iron crib bolted to the stone floor. The walls weren't wallpapered. They were lined with hand-drawn sigils, childlike but exact. The kind of symbols no normal child would ever know, unless they'd been taught. On the far wall, a handprint, too small to be adult, too high to be a toddler's. It wasn't painted, it was burned into the plaster. Flesh, heat, a moment frozen in agony. The inspectors who found it never filed the official report. They just left, quietly. One walked off the job entirely, flew to Alaska the next day. When questioned, he simply said, the walls weren't empty. But they were, except for what was inside them. Behind that same wall, sealed in with lime and brick, they found the skeletal remains of a young boy. Knees pulled to his chest, mouth open in a silent scream. No name, no ID. But nearby, preserved in perfect condition, was a Winslow family pendant, the kind worn only by inheritors. But here's the horror. There are 10 identical pendants unaccounted for. 10 adopted children. 10 pendants, one body. So where are the rest? You see, the Winslow family didn't just perform rituals. They believed in cycling. That through precise timing and pain, the soul could be passed on, reinitiated into a bloodline without blood. And the walls were the carriers, not metaphorically, literally. Insulation was removed. Bricks were hand-laid, bones, teeth, fabric scraps, deliberately placed between joists and lath. Each generation layering their chosen child into the very framework of the house, feeding it, preserving the lineage not through memory, but through containment. It wasn't a home, it was a body. And the longer you stayed inside it, the more it remembered you. That's why they never let the children leave, not fully. Because if one escaped, it would weaken the structure. The cycle would fracture. And the secret of the Winslows, their real secret, was this. They weren't trying to preserve their past. They were trying to build a vessel strong enough to survive the future. You ever hear of sympathetic architecture? It's an old theory, ancient even, that a building, if designed with enough intention, can absorb emotion, not like a recording, more like a mirror. The structure echoes the energy poured into it, joy, violence, grief, obsession. And over time, that mirror stops reflecting and starts responding. The Winslow house was built in 1880, but it wasn't designed by any known architect. The original blueprints are missing from the local archives, replaced by a vague private contractor entry dated October 31st of that year. Halloween. Coincidence? Not likely. Because the symbols etched beneath the foundation, later revealed in ground-penetrating scans, were not structural. They were ritualistic. Protective circles, binding glyphs, alignments with star maps that hadn't even been discovered yet. And at the center, a perfect octagon, just like the chamber where they found the first Thomas sealed alive. The Winslows believed in something called transference through geometry. A belief that trauma, when repeated in the same spatial pattern, could summon a higher form of continuity. Not just memory, but presence. That by ritualizing pain in identical spaces, they could create a living echo of the original subject. Every room in the house, every corridor, every stairwell was measured and duplicated with mathematical precision. The third floor, an exact replica of the second, just inverted. The attic, a reverse negative of the basement flipped on a central axis. You're not walking through a mansion, you're walking through a circuit. And that circuit had one job, to hold the essence of Thomas. Not a Thomas. The Thomas. You see, each boy given that name wasn't just another child. He was a P replacement. A vessel to house the previous one's energy, until the form wore out. Then, the next cycle began. Alwa. West 12 to 13, always a year, always silence on the final night. Because that's when the housing was complete. They didn't bury the boys to forget them. They buried them to keep them near. Like wires behind a wall, like roots under a tree. And the family? They weren't just witnesses. They were keepers. Every meal, every lesson, every lie whispered at night. It was all part of the programming, conditioning a soul to stay, even when the flesh was gone. By the time Sarah understood this, she'd already stayed too long, and the house had begun to respond. When you stand at the center of the Winslow house's upper library, directly beneath the vaulted oculus, you can hear breathing. Not wind, not creaks. Breathing. It starts slow, barely audible. But once you stay still long enough, once your own heartbeat settles, it becomes clear. The house is alive. Not metaphorically, not poetically, mechanically. Sarah didn't believe it at first. She thought it was just her nerves, just fear messing with her senses. But when she opened the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, everything changed. There were blueprints, hand-drawn, yellowed with time. They weren't just diagrams of the house. They were cut maps of behavior. Lines traced through rooms, pathways of repeated action. Where each Thomas walked, where each slept, where each stood for prolonged periods, overlaid over generations, as if someone had been tracking them, not just with journals or memories, but with geometric precision. Motion captured and converted into ritual. A signature written in footsteps. At the bottom of the diagrams, one phrase appeared over and over, in red ink. The pattern must be preserved. And Sarah realized something horrifying. She had already broken the pattern. By entering rooms in the wrong order. By opening doors not meant for her. By seeing what she should never have seen. And that's when the walls started changing. Mirrors reflecting rooms that didn't exist. Paintings shifting positions overnight. Doors that led to closets in the day, leading to stairwells at night. She documented it all, on her phone, her recorder, her notepad. But then the files started corrupting. Photos disappeared. Audio warped into static. Words rearranged themselves. It wasn't just gaslighting. It was a containment. The house had protocols, systems designed to protect the secret at all costs. And now that Sarah had unearthed Tumuk, it was treating her like a Thomas, reprogramming her environment, shaping her perception, prepping her mind for the ritual. And this is where you come in. If you've followed this far, you're not just a viewer anymore. You're part of the chain. The house wants continuity. It feeds on witness, on belief. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. There's a point in every investigation where you're no longer discovering the truth, you're disturbing it. Sarah reached that point the moment she descended into the second sub-basement. It wasn't on the blueprints, not on the original plans, not even hinted at in the journals. This level was sealed behind a false furnace wall. She only found it because of the draft, air being sucked downward through a hairline crack in the brickwork. A vacuum pull. Like something underneath was breathing in. The stairs were stone, wet, carved by hand, and the deeper she went, the more the light from her flashlight seemed to narrow. Like the darkness itself was resisting illumination. At the bottom, she found a door. Black wood, steel frame, no handle, no lock, just a single phrase burned into the center. In place of the firstborn. Her fingers trembled as she pressed against it. The door opened on its own. The room beyond was circular, about 20 feet in diameter, with walls lined in bone. Not decorations, not ornaments. Real, human, bone. Femurs, skulls, ribs, cleaned, preserved, fitted like tiles. Not just stacked, but arranged in spirals. Spirals that led inward to a single object in the center. A stone cradle. Empty. Inscribed with the same phrase over and over, etched by 1,000 hands in different styles. He took their years, we took their pain. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her legs went weak. The cradle wasn't symbolic. It wasn't art. It was active. Because above it, hanging from the ceiling by lengths of ancient iron chain, was something that shouldn't exist. A suspended apparatus of surgical tools, scalpels, tubing, mechanical syringes, all automated, all wired into the cradle's foundation. A machine designed not to kill, but to extract. Memories, blood, age, something more. This was how the family survived. Every Thomas was sacrificed for show. He was harvested. And the family, their longevity, their power, their strange untouched wealth, was fed by what was taken. Sarah turned to run, but the door was gone. Just smooth stone where it once stood. The house had decided. She was no longer a visitor. She was part of the pattern now, and unless she could rewrite it, she'd never leave. Some secrets are kept in vaults, others are kept in blood. Sarah pressed her palms against the cold stone where the door had vanished. It was seamless, like it had never existed. Her flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped, not gradually but instantly, like something had drawn the warmth out of her body. The stone cradle in the center of the chamber began to hum. It wasn't mechanical. It was biological. A low, pulsing frequency that made the air feel heavy, like every breath was a struggle. Her heartbeat synced to the vibration, not by choice, by force. And then, the wall moved. Not all of it, just a section, slowly sliding open to reveal a narrow corridor, lit not by light bulbs, but bioluminescent glyphs, etched into the stone. They pulsed in a rhythm, ancient language made from light and geometry. Sarah stepped forward. She didn't want to, but something deeper than thought was compelling her. A pull, like a tether, wrapped around the marrow of her spine, dragging her forward step by step. The corridor led to a library, not of books, but of names. Thousands, tens of thousands, burned into thin sheets of bone filed carefully on bronze racks, each labeled with a date, an age, and a single word. Transferred. Each name had been someone's son. Each file was a receipt. The Durham family hadn't just survived the 20th century's economic collapse. They hadn't merely retained power while other dynasties fell. They had done it by becoming something else. Not occultists, not serial murderers. harvesters of potential. Each boy named Thomas had been a conduit, ritually selected to carry the weight of transference, to absorb the rot, the debt, the spiritual cancer of the family, and then be emptied to cleanse them. Sarah realized something else then. The town hadn't protected the family out of fear alone. They had benefited. Millbrook hadn't collapsed like the neighboring towns. It had prospered, quietly, strangely, even during the Great Depression, even during the recessions and crises. The town fed the family, and the family fed the town. But now something had changed. Because as Sarah's eyes scanned the library of names, she found one final freshly carved plaque, different from the others. 2025. Sarah Collins. Transferred, initiate. She staggered backward. This was never about inheritance. She was the first to uncover the truth because she was the next. Unless she rewrote the covenant, her life would end where their power began. The room began to breathe. Not in metaphor, literally. The walls expanded and contracted, slow and rhythmic, as if the house itself were alive and aware of her. Sarah backed away from the plaque with her name on it, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. But something inside her clicked. A memory. Her great-aunt Margaret. The funeral. The strange look from the family's lawyer. She hadn't inherited the house. She had been selected. A knocking sound echoed down the corridor. Not a ghostly tap, not something ancient or otherworldly. This was human. Desperate. Someone was alive behind the wall. Sarah turned back to the bioluminescent glyphs and scanned for a mechanism. One symbol glowed brighter than the rest, a triangle interlaced with a circle, pulsing with heat. She pressed her hand to it. The wall hissed. And then it opened. The chamber beyond was colder than anything she'd ever felt, but not from the air, from the absence of life. Lined with metal lockers. Not lockers, coffins. Vertical, transparent. Inside each stood a child. Not dead. Preserved. Suspended in some kind of ancient fluid, eyes closed, bodies perfectly intact. Like time had stopped for them. Each one wore a small brass tag around their neck. Thomas, year, sequence. 6 boys, the last one, from 2023. They had never been killed, not in the way she thought. They had been stored, harvested and preserved like vintage wine, their essence drained and catalogued, ready for something Sarah hadn't yet imagined. But that wasn't the worst part. In the center of the chamber, something floated in a tank twice the size of the others. Something older. Emaciated, hollow-eyed, but alive. Its face looked like hers. Not exactly, but enough that her stomach flipped. It had the same high cheekbones, the same almond-shaped eyes. And it was smiling. A long, cracked grin, revealing teeth that had no business belonging to anything human. Suddenly, the tank lit up, and the glyphs on the wall ignited in sequence. She wasn't the next Thomas. She was the once vessel. Everything the family had done, every child, every cycle, had led to this. To her. Not an end, a rebirth. The house wasn't a tomb, it was a womb. And the Durham legacy wasn't dead. It was waiting to be born again. They called it the renewal. Scrawled across the final pages of the Durham journals, the ritual had a name. One spoken only within bloodlines, not to townsfolk, not to outsiders, not even to the children they harvested. It was their God, their gospel, their guarantee of immortality. Sarah stood frozen as the temperature dropped further, the glyphs pulsing like a heartbeat, syncing with her own. The tank in the center began to drain. That thing. The hollow-eyed version of herself floated downward, its fingers twitching, mouth parting with an audible click of ancient joints. The journals laid it bare. Every 17 years, one Thomas. Every century, one host. The blood of the boy binds the family. The blood of the woman becomes the family. Sarah was the host, not by accident, by gut design. She tried to run, but the hallway behind her had sealed. No doors, no escape. Only the altar ahead, now glowing faintly red as the drained fluid pooled into the carved channels and disappeared through unseen pipes. From the ceiling above the tank, something descended, an ancient mechanical harness that looked part surgical device, part throne. A crown of twisted wires and bone. It was moving toward her. The machine had been waiting, calibrated, timed. Sarah screamed, backing against the glass coffin of the 2023 boy. His eyes opened. She gasped. His mouth pressed against the tank wall, mouthing something over and over. "Don't let it in. Don't let it in. Don't let it in." The lights went black. Then, the sound. A whisper, but layered, generations speaking in unison, as if 100 Durham ancestors were trapped inside a single voice. "You carry the key, child, as she carried it before you. Let the house be born again." A searing pain shot through Sarah's spine. Her back arched violently. The crown affixed itself, dropping onto her skull, key a claw. Sharp prongs drove into her temples, and images flooded her mind. Every Thomas, every ritual, every sacrifice. She saw what the boys never lived long enough to see, the culmination, the moment the bloodline turned inward and became eternal. This wasn't about wealth. This was about consciousness transfer. Every 100 years, the Durhams didn't just preserve legacy, they reincarnated it, through her. The glyphs began burning with fire now, flames licking upward, not consuming but illuminating. The house shuddered as if alive and writhing in anticipation. And from deep within her chest, Sarah heard a second heartbeat. It wasn't hers. It had been implanted. The true heir. The Durham entity, and she was its cradle. Resurrection 12. There are moments in history when a single choice fractures the world. Sarah lay motionless on the altar, the crown still fused to her skull, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Every nerve screamed. Her bones felt hollowed out, like someone else was living inside her. And maybe someone was. The Durham bloodline wasn't just preserving tradition. It was transferring consciousness, layer by layer, generation by generation. Every Thomas was a battery, every host a vessel. The entity pulsed within her, trying to overwrite her will like a corrupted operating system rebooting her soul. And in that moment, she understood. Margaret Durham's strange words at graduation. The sudden inheritance. The impossibly synchronized ritual calendar. It had all been set in motion decades ago. She was never meant to discover the truth. She was meant to become it. The tank behind her began to refill, this time not with fluid, but fog. Dense and oily. It slithered up the glass, leaking from the boy's mouth and eyes, merging with the steam from the altar. Whatever was inside him had unfinished business, and it was looking for a way out. Sarah gripped the journal in her trembling hands, flipping to the last page. If the host awakens before fusion, the line breaks. But if she accepts willingly, the cycle completes. The Durham become many in one, eternal, infinite. There is no death. There is only continuation. The altar split beneath her, revealing a blade embedded in stone. Cold, ancient, inscribed with the names of all the hosts who came before her. Each one had made the same decision. Some chose resistance. Their bodies were buried beneath the house. Others chose ascension. Their minds lived on, merged, stacked, layered like code, an ancestral hive hidden in the guise of a family tree. The entity whispered again, directly, into her consciousness now. There is no Sarah, only we. Finish the ritual and become. Her hand hovered over the blade. One move, and she ends the cycle. Another move, and she becomes the most powerful creature the Durham line had ever produced. They had taken everything. But this was her only moment of control. This isn't just Sarah's decision. It's yours. The house waits. The knife glows. And in the next breath, she must choose bloodline or obliteration. The moment the blade left the stone, the house reacted like a living thing. The chandeliers shook, floorboards buckled. Walls exhaled long-forgotten secrets in the form of dust and shadow. Sarah held the ancient knife, now glowing faintly with crimson veins of light, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. It was not steel anymore. It was memory made metal. The condensed will of every Thomas, every Durham, every decision buried under ritual and blood. And yet, it did not control her. Not yet. She stepped off the altar, barefoot on cold stone, the whispers of the Durham line flooding her thoughts, but unable to possess her. The ritual was incomplete. She had stolen back the final act, and they hated her for it. All around her, the basement transformed. The fog thickened. The voices multiplied. Faces emerged from the shadows, twisted echoes of boys frozen in time, their mouths sewn shut with silk thread. They reached toward her, not in menace, but in mourning, like children waiting for someone to finally say their names. "Thomas, Thomas, Thomas," they whispered through their sewn mouths, a symphony of silence begging to be broken. Sarah realized the ritual had never been about one Thomas. It was about all of them. The Durham line had fed itself for 104 years on the stolen essence of adolescent boys, taking not just their bodies but their potential, their futures, their power, and the blade she held. It was their only chance at justice. In the far corner of the chamber, an archway of stone began to shift, revealing a spiral staircase descending into blackness. Something ancient stirred below, a core chamber, older than the house, older than the family. It pulsed with ritual energy, and the final sacrifice awaited. But this time, Sarah would not be the sacrifice. This time, she would be the judge. She descended into the earth, the knife held tight, her crown humming with rebellion. Every step downward stripped away more of her fear. Every breath was a declaration of war. And as the stone door closed behind her, the house whispered one last warning. She is not one of us. She broke the chain. She will unmake the order. Sarah smiled. Exactly. There are places beneath the earth that were never meant to be touched by light. As Sarah descended the spiral staircase, the air grew colder. Not the cold of weather, but of absence. An absence of time, an absence of life, an absence of God. The steps weren't made of stone, not exactly. They were bone-white and porous, like coral pulled from the ocean floor. But they pulsed faintly, as if whatever built this spiral was still alive, or perhaps never truly died. The blade in Sarah's hand grew hotter the deeper she went, glowing now with a deep internal ember, like it remembered this path, like it had been here before. And then she arrived. The chamber opened into a subterranean cathedral of horror, massive, circular, and impossible. The ceiling soared above her, lined with carvings that defied every known civilization, a convergence of Babylonian, Egyptian, Gothic, and something older, something non-human. Figures danced across the stone, cloaked beings holding children aloft before impossible gods made of geometry and flame. In the center of the chamber stood a second altar, this one made not of stone, but of fused skulls. Hundreds of them, interlocked like puzzle pieces, all child-sized. Behind the altar, a mural of the first Durham. He was not like the others. His eyes had been carved as hollow voids, black spaces that seemed to pull in all surrounding light. His arms outstretched over a congregation of small children, as if offering them to something unseen above. Sarah's breath caught. Behind the altar, laid out like a body awaiting autopsy, was the final Thomas. He wasn't dead, not fully. His chest rose and fell in slow, unnatural rhythm, eyes fluttering, body emaciated. He looked 12 and 100 years old at the same time. Kept alive by something ancient and cruel. And when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. You came back. You broke it. Please, finish what they wouldn't. Sarah stepped forward, and every ounce of her blood screamed. This was the heart of the system. This boy, this living relic, was the final keystone, the reason the Durham line could continue feeding. And yet he begged her to end it. The blade pulsed. The altar groaned. And above her, in the carvings, the eyes of the stone gods opened. This was no longer a mystery. It was a choice. Revelation or recursion. Sacrifice or salvation. She lifted the knife, and the chamber held its breath. The moment the blade lifted, the walls shuddered. Not like a tremor, not like a building under strain, but like a living creature stirred from hibernation. The altar of skulls began to hum, deep, low-frequency vibrations that throbbed through Sarah's bones. The Thomas on the slab opened his eyes fully, revealing pupils that were not round, but vertical, serpentine, flickering with something that didn't belong to any human bloodline. He was conscious now. It feeds on memory, he whispered, on repetition. Each time we forget, each time we look away, it grows stronger. And that's when Sarah understood. This wasn't just a ritual of sacrifice. It was a ritual of continuity. The Durham bloodline had built a system, one designed not only to survive, but to overwrite time, to loop, to regenerate itself across generations using the body of Thomas as the anchor, never dying, never aging past 13, never allowed to fully live. Each Thomas was not a new child. They were all the same child, reset, rebound, reinstalled. His memories scraped clean each cycle by whatever eldritch power lay beneath this house. The journals, desperate attempts to remember. But the family had always found them, until now. And now Sarah had broken the cycle. A crack began to spread across the altar, splitting through a line of fused jawbones. The knife in her hand pulsed red-hot, no longer a weapon, but a key. The mural behind her began to shift. Yes, shift. Figures once still now moved, their limbs elongating in impossible directions, turning toward her. From the stone, the carved god above the first Durham began to descend, not physically, but like a shadow sliding across the membrane of reality. The air burned, the walls wept black liquid. And then, a voice, not from the chamber, but from inside her skull. He is ours. He was promised. You cannot take it. Sarah gripped the blade tighter, the voice threatening to tear her thoughts apart. But Thomas looked at her again, eyes flickering, human for a moment. Please, I don't want to come back again. That was it. That was the line that mattered. Sarah plunged the blade down, not into the boy, but into the altar itself. The entire chamber screamed. Stone fractured, lights died, blood, centuries of it, burst from hidden seams in the walls, drenching the floor. Thomas exhaled once, peacefully, and the carved gods vanished. She woke up. Outside. Flat on the dead grass. The house was gone, not destroyed, not crumbled. Gone. Just a hollow lot in the early morning fog, surrounded by iron fencing that looked centuries old, though Sarah remembered it being installed in the 1980s. Her clothes were soaked in blood, but her body had no wounds. Her phone was missing. The documents, the photos, the diaries, all gone. She stumbled toward town, barefoot, lightheaded, and half convinced it had all been a hallucination. But as she passed the welcome sign into Millbrook, her blood ran colder than it had in the basement, because the sign had changed. Welcome to Winslow. Established 1881. Not Durham, not Millbrook. Winslow. It didn't make sense. Millbrook had been on every record, every map. Sarah had checked. But now even the police cruiser driving past had the word Winslow printed across its door. Reality had bent. She reached the town library. Inside, dusty old town registers were on display. She flipped through them, desperate, manic. And there they were. The Winslow family. Builders of the town, owners of the mill, social leaders, humanitarians. Same house, same faces. But no mention of Durham's. It had all been rewritten. Except for one thing. In the back of the library, in the children's section, she found a crude pencil sketch taped to a wall. A drawing by a kid. The title scrawled across the top. Me and My New Family. And below it, 6 stick figures holding hands, 5 adults, 1 child. A name written in crayon beside the smallest figure. Thomas. Sarah stepped back, mouth dry. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with finality. The kind of clarity that only comes after madness. She realized what she had done. She hadn't freed him. She hadn't stopped the cycle. She had rerouted it. The Winslows weren't new. They were just to a next version. The altar hadn't been destroyed. It had been moved. Adapted. A parasite doesn't die when you cut off a limb. It regrows stronger, smarter. Sarah left the library. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just whispered one word to herself over and over. Remember. Because that's how the cycle breaks. When even one of us refuses to forget. 2 weeks passed. Sarah didn't speak to anyone. Not about the house, not about the town, not about Thomas. She rented a room outside of Hartford, paid in cash, and covered every mirror with newspaper. Her laptop sat open, but she couldn't bring herself to write. Not yet. Because every time she started typing, the words vanished. Literally, letters deleted themselves in real time, line by line, as if something inside the machine, knew what she was trying to do. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a system. She tested it, typed, "The Winslow house hides." Gone. She wrote it on paper. The paper burned overnight in her locked drawer. She mailed a USB drive to a journalist friend in New York. 3 days later, he was dead. Carbon monoxide leak, the obituary said. But Sarah knew. The family wasn't just rewriting history. They were erasing the messengers. She turned to analog methods, microfilm, typewriters, old Catholic record books. Everywhere she went, the pattern repeated. Old names vanishing, replaced with others. Durham became Winslow. Winslow became Franklin. Franklin became Baudouin. Different names, same pattern, same silence. She began to understand the deeper truth. This wasn't a story about one family. It was about power. Pure, intergenerational, ritual-bound power. Hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by public benevolence, charity work, civic leadership. All built on the sacrifice of forgotten children. And the thing that chilled her most wasn't the rituals or the basement or the names. It was the public's complicity. No one fought them, no one questioned. Not the police, not the school teachers, not the local historians, because they were all fed by it. They were all allowed to live well, as long as they didn't ask questions. Sarah understood then. This wasn't just about the past. It was about control, memory, legacy. And if a system can control what you remember, it can control who you think you are. That's why they fear the truth. That's why the truth always costs something. They tried to erase her, not kill her, even erase her, because death is loud. But erasure, that's quiet, administrative, clean. First, her bank accounts froze. Unusual activity, they said. Then her freelance contracts vanished. Emails bounced. Then the DMV claimed she had never been issued a license. Sarah Collins was being rewritten, one document at a time. She rushed to her childhood home in Quincy. Her mother stared at her blankly, like she was a stranger. "You must be mistaken," the woman said. "I only have one daughter, Claire." Sarah was Claire. But the records now said otherwise. The Winslow pattern had begun to replicate itself across her life. It wasn't the house that cursed people. It was knowledge. Knowing was the infection. And the infection made you dangerous. So the system kicked in, just like it had for every Thomas. The more she learned, the less she existed. But that night, in a cheap motel near the edge of the state line, Sarah saw something that changed everything. A knock at the door, 3:33 a.m. She didn't answer. Instead, she watched through the peephole. A small boy, maybe 12 years old, pale, wide-eyed, silent. He held a diary. One of the diaries. She opened the door, slowly. He stepped inside without speaking and handed her the book. His hands were trembling. She turned to the first page. March 15th, 2025. My name is Thomas. They said I have 1 year. The book was warm, the ink still drying. He looked up at her and in a whisper asked, "Do you know what they do to us when we turn 13? At that moment, everything changed. Because Thomas wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a memory. He was alive. And this time, he wanted to run. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed her car keys. They weren't going to document this Thomas. They weren't going to harvest him, drain him, disappear him. Not a gal. Not this one. She would burn the whole legacy down before she let them, before they could rewrite history one more time. They drove all night, through back roads, small towns, and gas stations that didn't ask questions. The boy, Thomas, barely spoke. But when he did, it was like listening to the soul that had lived 100 lives. He wasn't the first. He knew. They always pick one like me, he said, staring out the window at the dark fields. One with no papers, no school, no system trace. Someone no one would miss. Then he turned to Sarah. But I found the door early this time. I remembered early. Remembered? What do you mean, remembered? She asked. He hesitated, then whispered, They recycle us. The words hit like a gunshot. They don't just kill us, they reboot us, strip our minds, inject our blood, reset the body. They figured out how to keep the vessel, wipe the name. That's why all the boys are Thomas. It's not a name, it's a role. Sarah was shaking. You're telling me they've been keeping the same boy alive through centuries? He nodded. They say I'm the seed, that if the ritual is done right, I carry something ancient, something they need to keep the line pure. His eyes glistened with tears. I remember the stone table. I remember the mask they put over my face. I remember being cut while they sang. I bled out, but I didn't die. I woke up a year later, smaller, dumber, reset, new clothes, new century, always 12, never 13. Sarah nearly swerved off the road. The journals weren't entries from different boys. They were chapters from her, the same boy's fragmented consciousness. Split, hidden, archived in walls and floorboards. Every 17 years the Winslows summoned him back, to finish what they started. Thomas grabbed her arm. We have 4 days until my birthday. If we don't stop them before then, I'll be gone again. Recycled. The next one will forget. His voice cracked. And I don't want to forget again. Sarah pulled the car over, looked him dead in the eyes. Then we fight. We fight with fire, with truth, with everything they buried. Because if what he said was true, then the Winslow family weren't just predators. They were alchemists of identity, ritual engineers, gatekeepers of bloodlines older than the country itself. And the boy beside her was the key they had been protecting for 104 years. 3 nights remained. 3 nights until the 104-year cycle would complete, until the boy named Thomas, what little of him still remained, would be consumed by the ritual again. They returned to the house, not just to destroy it, but to excavate the root. Because if a family can hide one boy in the walls for a century, what else have they hidden? Sarah and Thomas descended into the crypt beneath the basement. Yes, there was a second level, below the stone altar, past the ritual room with its surgical hooks and ceremonial scripts. There was a trapdoor, hidden beneath a false floor panel behind a rusted boiler. They pried it open with a crowbar. A cold breath of ancient air exhaled up from the dark. They climbed down into the dirt. And what they found was not just a secret. It was a temple, a burial ground of every generation of Winslows, but not buried, preserved, posed, masked. Dozens of robed skeletons sat in thrones carved into the earth, their hands bound in mud and cloth, their skulls painted gold. And in the center was a mirror. Not a reflective mirror. No. Math, black obsidian disc, pulsing faintly like it was alive, etched with runes that predated any known language. It wasn't for reflection. It was for death's containment. Thomas fell to his knees. They said it was the eye of the first Thomas, the original vessel. Sarah approached it. The air bent around the stone. She felt nauseous, like her memories were being siphoned. Then, movement. From the back of the chamber, behind one of the skeletons, a living man stepped forward. He was ancient, but not dead. His face was weathered like cracked leather, but his eyes were young, too young. "You've come to sever the line," he whispered. He was the last Winslow, the one who hadn't died, the one who had fed off the Thomas cycle for over a century, transfer, wring his soul each time the ritual was completed. He pulled out a knife, not steel, but bone. If the bloodline ends, so does the balance. This town, this country, doesn't know what it owes us. Sarah stepped in front of Thomas. "You've built an empire of ghosts. It ends now." In the next moments, everything moved in silence. The knife dropped, the mirror cracked, the chamber began to collapse. They ran, dragging Thomas through the tunnel as ancestral screams erupted from the earth. They didn't stop until the house was burning, not just from matches, but from fake truth. They leaked the story, photos, names, the diaries. They exposed the Winslow blood pact to the world. But not everyone believed. Some said it was just urban legend. Some said it was a hoax for attention. But some of you watching this now, you know better. You feel it in your bones, in your blood, in the way certain families never seem to die, in the way history hides its worst crimes in plain sight. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you was ready to remember, to break the spell, to sever the ritual. They are still out there, and some walls are still sealed. But now you've seen. Now you know. This was the morbid history of the Winslow family. What they hid in the walls for 104 years. And you were never meant to hear it.